believe you would all do this to me. It's just not fair.
My name is Claire Thompson. I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life, I've been known as the dependable one, the sister who never says no, the daughter who keeps the peace, the person who holds everything together no matter how much it costs her. I work as a marine biologist in Charleston, South Carolina, a career I built from the ground up with nothing but determination and long hours. And 3 years ago, I finally gave myself a gift I had always dreamed of. A small beach house near Myrtle Beach, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. That house was more than just property to me. It was a symbol of everything I'd sacrificed to get here. Late nights in the lab, years of saving and investing, weekends spent scrubbing tanks and collecting data when other people were out living their lives. I bought it on my own. I renovated it with my own 2 hands. I filled it with the scent of rosemary and lavender, with books and memories and quiet. It was, in every sense, mine. That's why nothing could have prepared me for the moment I arrived one Friday afternoon. Weekend bag still slung over my shoulder, ready for peace, and instead found myself standing on the threshold of my own home, being told to leave. Why is this parasite here? Get the hell out! The words cut through the salty air like a slap. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. But Kevin, my brother-in-law, wasn't joking. He stood in the doorway of my beach house, his face twisted with contempt, finger jabbing toward the driveway, as if I were some uninvited stranger. And behind him, that was the worst part. 15 pairs of eyes stared back at me from inside. Kevin's parents lounging on my white sectional sofa, his brothers raiding my kitchen, their children running around with sandy shoes on the floors I'd refinished myself. They were drinking from my glasses, tossing their jackets on my furniture, and acting as though they belonged there. It was like I had stepped into a parallel universe, one where the home I'd poured my heart into was no longer mine. "This is my house," I said, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. "I own it." "Yeah, well," Kevin sneered, folding his arms. "Jennifer said we could use it this weekend. We're having a family gathering here. Nobody invited you." I blinked at him. Jennifer said. My gaze shifted past him to my sister, my older sister Jennifer, standing by the kitchen island, scrolling through her phone and deliberately avoiding my eyes. The same sister I'd told, just 2 days earlier, at our mother's birthday dinner, that I was planning to spend this weekend here alone to decompress. She'd smiled and nodded then, told me I deserved it. Now she couldn't even look at me. "Jennifer," I called, my voice trembling just slightly. "Can we talk?" She finally looked up, her expression infuriatingly neutral. "I didn't think you'd actually come. You're always so busy with work." "I told you I was coming. I specifically said I needed this weekend." She shrugged, as if my words were inconsequential. "Well, Kevin's family needed a place to stay. This house just sits empty most of the time. I figured you wouldn't mind." "You figured wrong," I said through clenched teeth. Kevin stepped forward, his voice dropping into that condescending tone I'd come to despise. "Look, we've got 15 people here who drove hours to be here. You're one person. Do the math. Just go back to Charleston and come back next weekend." Do the math. The phrase landed like a punch. My needs didn't matter. My ownership didn't matter. My dignity didn't matter. All that mattered was their convenience. Around the room, some of Kevin's relatives shifted uneasily. Others smirked, clearly entertained by my humiliation. Kevin's mother even shook her head, as if I were the unreasonable one for daring to object. And in that moment, something inside me, something I had buried for years under layers of patience and politeness, shifted. I thought about all the times I'd bailed Jennifer out, when she and Kevin were behind on their mortgage. The countless weekends I'd spent babysitting their kids without complaint. The time I'd spent an entire Saturday in 100-degree heat helping Kevin's brother move. And this was how they repaid me, by treating me like an intruder in my own home. A slow, deliberate smile spread across my face, not a warm one, not a forgiving one. The kind of smile that appears when a person realizes they've had enough. "Sure," I said quietly. "I'm leaving." Kevin blinked, clearly surprised. Good. Finally, some sense. I turned toward the door but paused long enough to look back at them. "Just so we're clear, Kevin, you're asking me to leave my own property?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." "And Jennifer," I said, locking eyes with my sister, "you're okay with this?" She didn't look up. "It's just one weekend, Claire." "Don't be dramatic." I nodded slowly, already thinking ahead. "Okay, then enjoy your weekend." I walked out, leaving the door open behind me. As I made my way to the car, I could hear laughter from inside. Laughter that said they thought they had won, that I had rolled over, that I would accept this humiliation like I always had. They had no idea what was coming. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sting of betrayal had hardened into something sharper. This wasn't about a single ruined weekend anymore. It was about a lifetime of being underestimated, dismissed, and taken for granted. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to let it slide. The tide was about to turn, and when it did, they would regret every single word they'd spoken on that porch. I didn't drive far that afternoon, just a few minutes down the road, until I found a quiet gas station overlooking the water. My hands were trembling as I pulled into a parking spot, but not from fear. This was adrenaline. Pure, concentrated, unfiltered adrenaline. The kind that comes when a lifetime of being underestimated collides with the final straw. For 32 years, I had played the part everyone expected me to. The calm, patient younger sister, the dependable daughter, the woman who made sacrifices without being asked. I told myself it was kindness, that I was being a good person, a good family member. But in reality, I had been complicit in my own disrespect. I had taught them how to treat me by never demanding more. And today, that ended. I stared out at the horizon, the waves stretching endlessly toward the sky, and I thought about what had just happened. Kevin, a man who didn't own a single nail in that beach house, had ordered me to leave it. Jennifer, the sister I'd trusted more than anyone, had let him do it. And my family, they were probably laughing inside, telling themselves I'd gotten over it by the time dessert was served. They were wrong. I pulled out my phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Gregory Mills, my lawyer, the one who had handled the closing paperwork on the house. Gregory was calm, efficient, and had a ruthless streak that I suddenly appreciated more than ever. The second call was to my property manager, just in case I needed official documentation on hand. And the third, well, that was to someone I'd hoped never to involve in family matters. But desperate times called for decisive action. By the time I hung up, the sun had begun to dip toward the horizon, painting the water in streaks of amber and rose. My heart was pounding, but my mind was crystal clear. They had underestimated me for the last time. That night, I checked into a modest hotel about 20 minutes from the beach house. It was nothing fancy: beige walls, an overworked air conditioner, a lumpy mattress, but it was quiet, and it gave me space to think. I spread my documents across the bed, the property deed with my name on it, the insurance papers, and a signed emergency use agreement I'd given Jennifer 2 years ago. I had written it casually, never thinking it would matter. Just a promise that she could use the house in emergencies. But this wasn't an emergency. This was entitlement, pure and simple. As I stared at those papers, a surge of righteous anger coursed through me. They'd treated me like a doormat because I'd always behaved like one. But that wasn't who I was anymore. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Jennifer. "Why are you being so difficult? It's just one weekend. Kevin's family thinks you're crazy." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Difficult, crazy. Words meant to gaslight me into compliance. They weren't even pretending to see my side. I typed back 2 words: "We'll talk." Seconds later, another message. "Don't be such a drama queen." I turned off my phone. The next morning, I was sitting across from Gregory in his Charleston office, a cup of bitter black coffee in hand, as I recounted every detail of the incident. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just listened, jotting notes in his legal pad. "So," he said finally, "they're currently occupying your property without permission." "Yes," I said. "Jennifer has a key, but I never gave her permission to invite anyone else, especially not 15 people. And your brother-in-law ordered you to leave in front of witnesses." "At least 15. Gregory leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "You have a few options. The simplest and most nuclear would be to call the police and have them all removed for trespassing. But because Jennifer has a key and implied permission, it could get messy." "What's the other option?" He smiled, the kind of smile lawyers give when they're about to propose something devastating but perfectly legal. "We make them very, very uncomfortable." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." For the next hour, he outlined a plan so elegant in its simplicity, it almost felt poetic. No screaming matches, no police storming in. Just property law, dry, technical, undeniable, wielded with surgical precision. And every part of it was within my rights. By noon, the wheels were in motion. I'd signed documents authorizing utility suspensions. I'd filed a trespass notice with the county sheriff's office, effective that evening. I even contacted the homeowners association to inform them that unauthorized guests were on my property. A move that ensured any complaints from neighbors would now come directly to me. Then I waited. I spent the afternoon at a local coffee shop, nursing an iced latte and watching gulls dive into the surf. My phone, which I'd turned back on, exploded with notifications. Missed calls from Jennifer, angry voicemails from my parents, even texts from Kevin himself. "You're overreacting." "It's one weekend, Claire. If you do anything stupid, you'll regret it." Not one apology, not one acknowledgement of what they'd done. They still believed I would cave, that I'd swallow the insult, accept the disrespect, and quietly fade into the background. They were about to find out how wrong they were. At exactly 3:07 p.m., my phone rang. Gregory's number. "It's done," he said simply. "Everything. Everything they should be finding out about now." I hung up and sat back, heart thundering in my chest. The first text came 3 minutes later. Jennifer, frantic and furious. "Claire, what the hell did you do? The power just went out, and there's no water." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "What are you talking about?" I typed back. "Don't play dumb. The utilities are off. Kevin called the company. They said the account holder suspended service." "Well," I replied, "I'm the account holder. And since I'm not using the property this weekend, I saw no reason to keep paying for utilities unauthorized guests are enjoying." The silence that followed was delicious. "You can't do this. We have elderly people here." "They're free to leave any time," I replied. "In fact, I believe Kevin told me to get out yesterday. Now they can take his advice." By sunset, the calls had escalated, my parents pleading, Kevin raging, Jennifer threatening legal action she didn't understand. But the law was on my side, and they knew it. Then came the final blow, a formal notice served by the county sheriff, giving them until 6 p.m. to vacate the property or be removed by law enforcement. At 5:30, I parked a block away and watched the show unfold. Kevin's family stumbled out into the humid evening, angry, sweaty, and humiliated. Cars loaded with coolers and suitcases, Kevin barking orders, Jennifer pacing with her phone glued to her ear. When the sheriff's cruiser pulled into the driveway at 6 sharp, the message was clear. Their reign over my home was over. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just watched quietly as they drove away, shrinking into the distance, and for the first time in years, I felt something I'd never felt before. Powerful. The next morning, the air felt different. Heavier somehow, charged with the weight of everything that had happened. I drove back to my beach house cautiously, unsure of what I would find. As I turned onto the familiar street, lined with weathered palm trees and pastel cottages, I realized I didn't feel like the same woman who had stood humiliated in her own doorway 2 days before. That woman had been tired, compliant, and too willing to swallow her anger. The woman parking at the curb now was something else entirely. Deliberate, determined, and ready for whatever came next. When I unlocked the front door, the silence was immediate. They were gone, all of them. No more laughter, no more smug faces sprawled across my furniture. For a fleeting moment, I almost felt victorious, but the feeling evaporated the second I stepped inside. The house, my sanctuary, was unrecognizable. There were deep red wine stains splashed across my white living room carpet, soaking into fibers I'd paid a small fortune to have custom installed. Someone had left muddy footprints on the stairs, their soles grinding dirt into the pale wood with every step. The deck railing, where I'd spent countless sunsets watching the tide roll in, was marred with cigarette burns, despite my clear no-smoking policy. The kitchen was worse, a battlefield of empty beer bottles, greasy pans, and half-eaten food littered every surface. Someone had apparently tried to cook shrimp and failed spectacularly. The shells scattered across my granite countertops like evidence of a crime. But it was upstairs where my anger hardened into something colder, something almost physical. My bedroom, my most private space, had been violated. The bed was unmade, sheets twisted and stained. My closet doors were flung open, clothes tossed carelessly on the floor. And on my dresser, the jewelry box my grandmother had given me on my 16th birthday sat ajar. I crossed the room in 3 strides and peered inside. Empty. The velvet-lined compartment where my grandmother's pearl necklace should have been was bare. For a long moment, I just stared at it. That necklace was more than a piece of jewelry. It was a legacy. My grandmother had given it to me on her deathbed, pressing it into my palm with trembling hands and whispering, "Stay curious, stay strong." It was the one tangible piece of her I had left, a reminder of the woman who'd believed in me when no one else did. And now it was gone. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and called Jennifer. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice already defensive. "What now, Claire?" "My grandmother's pearl necklace is missing," I said, my voice like ice. "Someone stole it." "That's ridiculous. Nobody stole anything." "It was in my jewelry box yesterday. Now it's gone. Who was in my bedroom?" "I don't know. Maybe you misplaced it." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Right. I misplaced the one thing that never leaves my dresser. Jennifer, I'm filing a police report." "You wouldn't dare." "Watch me." I hung up and immediately dialed the non-emergency police line. An officer arrived within an hour, Deputy Walsh, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes and a firm handshake. She walked through the house, taking photos of the damage, jotting notes as I explained what had happened. When I mentioned the necklace, her expression hardened. "Do you have photos of it? Insurance documentation?" "I have both," I said, "and I have a list of everyone who was here." "Good," she replied. "We'll need all of that. I'll be honest with you, though. Proving who took it will be difficult unless someone confesses or we find it in their possession." "I understand." After she left, I spent 3 hours scrubbing surfaces, washing sheets, and documenting every stain, scratch, and broken object. With every swipe of a sponge, my anger deepened. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. It was about violation. They hadn't just disrespected my space, they'd stolen from me. My phone buzzed constantly. Jennifer, Kevin, even my mother. Their messages ranged from guilt-tripping pleas to furious accusations. "You're tearing this family apart?" "It's just a necklace, Claire. Let it go." "Do you really want Kevin to lose his job over this?" But the one message that stopped me cold came from an unknown number steady before midnight. "Claire, it's Melissa." Melissa, Kevin's younger sister. We'd only met a handful of times, but she'd always been polite, almost apologetic for her brother's behavior. "Hi," I said warily. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, her voice soft but sincere. What Kevin did was completely out of line. "Thank you," I murmured, exhausted. "He's always been like this, you know, entitled. My parents spoiled him, and Jennifer just lets it happen. I wasn't at the beach house, thank God, but my mom called me ranting about you." When I heard the full story, I was disgusted. "Did you know about the necklace?" I asked. "What necklace?" I told her. There was a long silence on the other end, then a quiet curse. "Claire, I hate to say this, but Kevin's been having money problems, bad ones. He made some terrible investments and lost a lot. He's desperate, trying to borrow from anyone who will listen. I wouldn't put it past him." When we hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, staring out the window at the moonlit ocean. Suddenly, everything clicked into place. the push to use my house, the condescending do the math lecture, the anger when I refused to back down, the theft. They weren't just being entitled, they were trying to exploit me. And when that failed, they stole from me. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Deputy Walsh. "Miss Thompson," she said, "we have an update. We received an anonymous tip about a pawn shop in North Charleston. We followed up. We found your necklace." My heart stopped. "You found it?" "We did, and we have security footage of the person who pawned it." She slid a photo across the table during our meeting. My breath caught. Kevin. Clear as day, handing my grandmother's necklace over the counter in exchange for cash. The timestamp was from the same night they'd been kicked out. "That's him," I whispered. "We've issued a warrant for his arrest. Grand larceny. The necklace is valued at over $4,000. I walked out of the station feeling hollow. This was really happening. Kevin was going to be arrested. My family was going to implode. And somehow I knew exactly how it would play out. I'd be painted as the villain, the unforgiving sister, the one who couldn't just let it go. My mother called before I even reached my car. "Claire, what have you done?" she demanded. "They're arresting Kevin. You pressed charges against your own family." "Kevin stole from me," I said evenly. "What did you expect me to do? Let it go. Family is more important than things." Is it because Kevin didn't think family was important when he stole from me? Jennifer didn't think it was important when she gave away my house. And you didn't think it was important enough to even ask if I was okay. He has 2 children. You're going to put their father in jail. No, Kevin put himself there when he committed a felony. Claire Marie, I'm your mother, and I am telling you to drop those charges. Or what? I asked quietly. You'll cut me out of the will. You'll stop talking to me? Fine, do it. Because I'm done pretending that family means I have to accept being treated like garbage. And with that, I ended the call and blocked her number. Then I blocked Jennifer's, then Kevin's. One by one, I severed the ties that had been strangling me for years. The silence that followed was heavy, but it wasn't lonely. It was freedom. Kevin's arrest hit our family like a grenade. It exploded through every layer of our already fragile relationships, leaving behind a smoldering wreckage of accusations, blame, and denial. By the time the news reached me, a terse voicemail from my father, followed by a flood of hateful text messages from extended relatives, the story was already public. Local media picked it up almost instantly. City employee arrested for grand larceny. Kevin's mugshot was plastered across the evening news. His name, and by extension, my family's name, was now attached to a criminal investigation. I'd like to say I felt triumphant. That I poured a glass of wine and toasted to long overdue justice. But the truth was more complicated. Watching that headline scroll across the screen, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, hollow. The kind of tired that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from the weight of too many years spent holding everything together for people who never once did the same for me. The days that followed blurred together. Angry calls from my mother, pleading voicemails from Jennifer, and the occasional hateful message from someone who barely knew me, but had decided I was the reason the family was falling apart. What none of them seemed willing to admit was that Kevin's actions, not my response to them, had set this entire disaster in motion. Then, a week after the arrest, Melissa called again. Her voice was trembling. "Claire," she said, "it's worse than you think." "What do you mean?" "When Kevin got arrested, Jennifer went through his office. She found documents, bank statements, fake invoices, emails. He's been embezzling from his job." I blinked, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "How much?" "About $50,000 over the last 2 years. He was manipulating expense reports, creating fake vendor accounts. It's bad, Claire, really bad. The city's doing a full audit." For a long time, I said nothing. $50,000. The man who had looked me in the eye and told me to do the math had been stealing from his employer while begging for money from family. The man who had called me a parasite in my own home had been draining public funds to feed his ego and his lifestyle. "What's going to happen to him?" I finally asked. "Prison, probably." Between your case and the embezzlement charges, the DA's talking about serious time. His lawyer's trying to negotiate a plea deal, but it's not looking good. And Jennifer? She's falling apart. The house is in foreclosure. Their savings are gone. He never told her how bad things were. I closed my eyes. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to savor the justice unfolding so perfectly around me. But instead, all I felt was tired. Bone-deep, soul-deep tired. This had started with a stolen weekend and spiraled into something so much larger. Lives were being destroyed. Families were unraveling. And I was at the center of it all. "Do you think I did the wrong thing?" I asked quietly. "No," Melissa said firmly. "I think you did the only thing you could do. Kevin's been getting away with things his whole life, because everyone's too scared to stand up to him. If it hadn't been you, it would have been someone else, eventually. Better now than later." Her words echoed in my head long after we hung up. Better now than later. A few days later, Deputy Walsh called with an update on the necklace case. "Kevin's lawyer reached out," she said. "They want to negotiate a plea deal. Restitution, a formal admission of guilt, probation. It's your call." I sat in the silence for a long time. Did I want more? Did I want to see him serve time for stealing from me, on top of everything else he was facing? Or was the admission of guilt the public acknowledgement that I had been wronged enough? What would restitution include? I asked. Full payment for the necklace's appraised value, compensation for property damage at your beach house, and a guilty plea that would go on his record. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, there was a knock on my apartment door. When I opened it, Jennifer was standing there. She looked broken. Her skin was pale, her eyes hollow, her cheekbones sharp from weeks of stress and sleepless nights. She stood on my doorstep like a ghost, and for the first time in years, I saw her without the layers of denial and arrogance that had always shielded her from reality. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, but stepped aside. She walked into my living room, sat down on the couch, and immediately began to cry. Not polite tears, not manipulative ones. These were deep, shuddering sobs from a woman who had finally reached the end of herself. "I'm sorry," she choked out between breaths. "I'm so sorry, Claire. You were right. About everything, about Kevin, about me. I was a terrible sister. I chose him over you again and again because I thought he needed me more. I convinced myself that you didn't need anyone, that you were too strong, too independent. But I was wrong." I stared at her, my throat tight. "I did need you," I whispered. "I needed you to have my back." "I know," she sobbed, "and I failed you. Kevin's lawyer showed me everything. The embezzlement, the gambling debts, the lies. He's been lying to me for years. We're losing everything. My credit is destroyed. His parents blame me. And Mom and Dad, they're furious with me for even considering divorce." I sat beside her. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't say, "It's okay," because it wasn't. But I listened. "The necklace," she continued. "He told me he found it at a pawn shop. He said he was going to surprise you by buying it back. I believed him. I defended him to you. And the whole time, he was the one who took it." There was nothing left to say, so I said the only thing I could. "I forgive you." Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. "What?" "I forgive you," I repeated. "Not because what you did was okay, and not because things can go back to how they were, but because holding on to anger is exhausting. And I'm tired. You're my sister. I love you. But loving you doesn't mean I'll let you treat me badly ever again." Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. "What do we do now?" "Now you figure out your life," I said gently. "You decide if you're staying with Kevin or not. You rebuild, and I'll do the same. But if we're going to have any kind of relationship, it has to be equal. No more taking without giving. No more assuming I'll always pick up the pieces." She nodded. "I understand, and I'll do better, I promise." After she left, I called Deputy Walsh and told her I'd accept the plea deal. Kevin would plead guilty, pay restitution, and live with a criminal record that would follow him for the rest of his life. That felt like enough. The embezzlement charges, however, were beyond my control. And as the case built against him, the full weight of his actions began to crush everything he'd built. 2 weeks later, I stood in my beach house, freshly cleaned, repainted, repaired. I had installed new locks and a top-tier security system. It felt like mine again, my space, my sanctuary. For the first time in a long time, I exhaled without a knot in my chest. Justice wasn't always swift, it wasn't always clean, but when it came, it brought with it something precious, peace. And as I stood there, listening to the waves crash against the shore, I knew this was only the beginning. It was about 3 months after Kevin's guilty plea when the past decided it wasn't quite finished with me yet. Life had begun to settle into something resembling normal, or at least a new version of it. My beach house was secure, my work was thriving, and I'd even begun hosting quiet weekend get-togethers with friends, the kind that reminded me life could still be joyful and uncomplicated. Jennifer and I spoke occasionally, cautiously, like two people testing the ice after it's cracked beneath them. And while we weren't close, we were no longer strangers. Then one afternoon, I received a call that would upend everything I thought I knew. "Hello, Claire," the voice said. "This is Attorney Hoffman. I represent Kevin in his ongoing legal matters. He's requested to speak with you." My immediate reaction was visceral. "No," I said. "There's nothing left to say." "He claims he has information you need to hear about the weekend at your beach house. He says there's more to the story than what came out in court." I almost hung up again, almost, but something in Hoffman's tone stopped me. "What kind of information?" "He wouldn't say, only that it involves your parents and Jennifer." I froze. My parents? Yes, he insists they were more involved than you realize. The words echoed in my head long after the call ended. More involved. My parents, the same people who had chastised me for pressing charges, who had called me a bad daughter for holding Kevin accountable. The same people who had spent years painting me as too serious and too independent. Were they somehow part of this? I agreed to the call, but only under one condition. It would be by phone, monitored by the facility. The following Friday, I sat on the deck of my beach house with a glass of wine in hand, the evening sun bleeding orange and gold into the water. At precisely 6:00 p.m., the prison operator connected us. Claire, Kevin's voice came through, hollow and subdued, stripped of the arrogance that had once defined him. "Thank you for taking my call." "Talk," I said flatly. He was silent for a moment. What I did was wrong. The theft, the lies, the embezzlement, all of it. I'm not making excuses. But there's something you need to understand about that weekend. It wasn't just my idea. I felt my pulse quicken. "What are you talking about?" "Your parents planned it." I shot to my feet. "You're lying." "I'm not," he said calmly. "Your mother knew you were coming that weekend. She told Jennifer to give me the keys and invite my family. She told her to make sure you'd confront us. Every detail, down to what I should say, came from her." "That's insane." "Is it? Think about it. Why would Jennifer hand over the keys without asking you? Why would my entire family happen to be ready that exact weekend?" "It wasn't coincidence, Claire. Your mom hates that you have money. That you bought this house without their help. She thought if I humiliated you enough, you'd sell the property and split the money with Jennifer." I gripped the railing, the ocean a blur below me. "Even if that's true, you still stole from me." "I did, and that part was all me. But I want you to know the truth. They used me as a weapon. And I was stupid enough to let them." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've had a lot of time to think," he said quietly. "And because you deserve to know that the people you're trying so hard to rebuild a relationship with were the ones who orchestrated the whole thing." The call ended, and I sat there long after the sun disappeared behind the horizon. The words circled in my head like a storm. They planned it. They wanted to humiliate you. If Kevin was lying, it was a cruel manipulation. But if he was telling the truth, and the presence of his lawyer during the call suggested he was, then my parents hadn't just stood by while I was mistreated. They had engineered the entire thing. That night, I scrolled through my phone and hovered over my mother's number. I'd unblocked it weeks ago but never called. My hand trembled as I pressed dial. She answered on the third ring. "Claire, is that you?" "It's me," I said coldly. "We need to talk." "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called. Your father and I." "Were you involved in planning what happened at the beach house?" I cut in. Silence. "I don't know what you mean," she said finally. "Kevin called me today. He told me you and Dad orchestrated the whole thing, that you told Jennifer to give them the keys and make sure I showed up." More silence. Then, "Kevin is a liar. You can't believe anything he says." "Answer the question, Mom." "Did you plan it?" I may have suggested that the house was sitting empty and that Kevin's family needed a place to stay, she admitted. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "You knew I was coming. Jennifer told you at your birthday dinner." "Well, I thought you'd be reasonable. I thought you'd understand that family needed the space more than you." I laughed, a sound that held no humor. "You set me up. You wanted to make me feel small enough to do what you wanted. That's not true. We were worried about you. You've been so distant, so focused on work. We thought maybe if you saw how much family needed you, I'd give you what you wanted, I finished for her. This was never about family. This was about control. You're being dramatic. No, I'm being clear. You used me. You've always used me. I was the reliable one, the one who never needed help. So you took me for granted while you fawned over Jennifer. And when I finally stood up for myself, you punished me for it. We simply prioritized Jennifer's needs, she snapped, by humiliating me, by orchestrating a situation where I was surrounded by people told I was the problem. I think you're overreacting. That was it, the final straw. I'm done, I said quietly. What? I'm done with this conversation. I'm done with your version of family. The one where I'm only valuable when I'm useful to you. Jennifer is trying to rebuild something with me based on honesty and respect. But you can't even admit what you did. Claire Marie, you don't mean that. I absolutely do. Don't call me again. Don't show up at my house. We're done. I hung up before she could respond and blocked the number, this time permanently. When I finally put my phone down, my hands were shaking, but not from anger, from clarity. For years, I'd believed I was the problem, that I was too cold, too distant, too independent. I'd believed the subtle criticisms, the guilt trips, the manipulation, but the truth was simpler and far uglier. They were threatened by me. My success made them feel small. My independence made them feel powerless. And instead of celebrating my accomplishments, they tried to tear me down. Not anymore. Respect wasn't negotiable. Family wasn't a free pass for cruelty. And from now on, I would choose peace, even if it meant choosing it alone. The next morning, I drove to Jennifer's apartment, a modest 2-bedroom in a quiet part of Charleston. She opened the door in yoga pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She looked like she hadn't slept, and when she saw my face, she knew immediately that something was different. "Claire," she said cautiously, "is everything okay? Can I come in?" We sat at her small kitchen table, steam curling from the mugs of coffee she poured without asking. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I told her everything. Word for word, I repeated Kevin's confession from the phone call. The plan, the manipulation, the humiliation, all orchestrated by our parents. Her expression shifted like a time lapse of weather. First disbelief, then shock, and finally a heavy, defeated sadness. "I suspected," she said quietly. "Mom was relentless about using your house that weekend. She kept saying you wouldn't mind, that you owed us after all the years of support. I knew it was wrong, but I went along with it. It was easier than arguing." "She used both of us," I said. "I know." Jennifer's voice was a whisper. "I called her last night after you did. She tried to convince me that you were being dramatic, but I didn't let her. I told her what she did was unforgivable, that she damaged both of her daughters by playing us against each other." I blinked, stunned. "What did she say?" "She cried," Jennifer said. "She said I was choosing you over her." "And what did you say?" "I told her I was choosing honesty over manipulation." For a long time, we sat in silence. Then Jennifer reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't the sister you deserved. I'm sorry I let them use me as a weapon against you. I squeezed her hand gently. I'm sorry too, for letting things get this far, for letting them define what our relationship was supposed to be. Can we start over? She asked. We already are, I said, and I meant it. A year passed. The beach house, once a battleground, had transformed into something else entirely. It was no longer a symbol of tension or betrayal. It had become a gathering place for people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. I'd hosted Melissa's birthday there, several research team retreats, even a small wedding for a colleague. Each event was filled with warmth, laughter, and an ease I hadn't felt with family in years. Jennifer had rebuilt her life from the ground up. She'd been promoted twice at the hospital, moved into a better apartment, and was dating someone new, a kind, soft-spoken physical therapist who treated her with the respect Kevin never had. Her children, once caught in the chaos of their parents' implosion, were happy and thriving, and every time I visited, they ran to greet me with cries of "Aunt Claire" that melted away every ounce of bitterness I'd once carried. Kevin had been released on parole after serving 16 months. He was working in a warehouse, living in a halfway house, and sending Jennifer the meager child support payments the court required. He had written me a letter from prison, an apology, long and rambling, which I read once before, tucking into a drawer and forgetting. I didn't hate him anymore. I simply didn't think about him at all. My parents, on the other hand, had not fared as well. After I cut off financial help, their carefully curated image of middle-class comfort began to crumble. They sold the lake house they'd once dangled over my head, not to spite me, but to cover debts they'd been hiding for years. Without the emergency loans I had always provided, their finances collapsed. They downsized to a small condo and started attending therapy at Jennifer's insistence. They were learning, slowly, painfully, just how much damage they had done. They tried to reach out a few times, awkward, stumbling phone calls through mutual relatives, always with the same message: you're being stubborn. You need to forgive and move on. Can't you see you're tearing this family apart? Each time I sent the same response: I've moved on just fine. If the family is falling apart, maybe you should ask yourselves why. And I meant it. It was a crisp Saturday in November when the next chapter of my story began. Though I didn't realize it at first, I was at the beach house with Melissa and a few friends, preparing for a small Thanksgiving gathering. The smell of roasted vegetables filled the air, and the sound of laughter floated from the living room. For the first time in years, the holidays didn't feel heavy. They felt hopeful. Then my phone rang. Jennifer's name flashed across the screen. "Claire," she said, her voice trembling. "Dad had a heart attack. He's at Charleston Memorial." The world seemed to tilt for a moment. "Is he stable?" she said quickly. "They did emergency surgery. He's going to be okay, but he's asking for you." "I'll be there," I said without hesitation. The hospital was bright and sterile, its hallways smelling faintly of antiseptic and fear. Jennifer was waiting in the cardiac unit, her face pale and drawn. "How is he?" I asked. "Still weak," she said. "Mom's with him now. She doesn't know I called you." I hesitated. "I don't know if I can do this." "I'm not asking you to forgive him," Jennifer said softly. "But he almost died tonight. He's scared. And whatever happened between us, he's still our dad. I stood there for a long time, thinking about the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had cheered when I got into college, who had quietly faded into the background while my mother orchestrated cruelty. At some point, he had stopped protecting me, but he had once loved me deeply. 5 minutes, I said. I'll give him 5 minutes. He looked so small in the hospital bed. The man who had once seemed larger than life was now surrounded by tubes and monitors, his skin pale and fragile. His eyes fluttered open when I stepped inside, and a flicker of relief crossed his face. "Claire," he whispered, "you came." "I came," I said, pulling up a chair. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "For everything, for not protecting you, for going along with your mother's schemes, for choosing comfort over what was right. I was a coward." I stared at him, my throat tight. "You hurt me, Dad, badly." "I know," he said, "and I can't undo it. But watching you walk away, watching you build a life without us, it taught me something. You were braver than I ever was. You chose integrity over comfort. I should have done that years ago." We talked for 20 minutes. It didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the past, but it felt like a beginning, a fragile, tentative first step towards something new. When I left the room, my mother was waiting in the hallway. "Thank you for going in," she said stiffly. "I didn't do it for you," I replied. "I know. But Claire..." She swallowed hard. "I need to say something. I was wrong about everything. I let jealousy and insecurity turn me into someone I don't even recognize. I hurt you because of it. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed you to know I see it now." I looked at her, really looked, and saw a woman who had spent so much time trying to control everything that she had lost herself in the process. "I appreciate you saying that," I said quietly, "but words aren't enough. It's going to take time, change, consistent effort. If you're willing to do that, maybe we can figure out what a relationship looks like, but it won't ever be what it was." "I understand," she whispered. That night, back at the beach house, my friends were waiting with warm food and warmer smiles. They asked if I was okay, and I realized the answer was complicated, but it was also yes, not perfect, not healed, but okay. Later, long after everyone had gone to bed, I sat on the deck beneath a blanket of stars and thought about the journey that had started with Kevin screaming at me to get out of my own house. I had lost so much: illusions, relationships, the comforting lie that family always means loyalty. But I had gained so much more. I had gained myself. The weeks that followed my father's heart attack felt strangely calm, not because everything was suddenly fixed, but because I had finally stopped trying to fix everything. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's choices on my shoulders. I wasn't bending myself into knots to maintain peace that had never truly existed. And I wasn't confusing forgiveness with permission. Kevin finished his sentence, though freedom was a relative term. He was a man permanently marked by the consequences of his actions. Living in a cramped apartment with second-hand furniture, unable to find work in any field resembling his old life. His reputation was gone, his finances shattered, and even his visits with his children were limited to supervised sessions that seemed to hurt everyone more than they helped. He had sold nearly everything of value to pay restitution, and even then, he owed hundreds of thousands more. debts that would follow him for decades. Jennifer, meanwhile, had transformed. Freed from the chaos of Kevin's shadow, she'd discovered a strength I don't think either of us knew she had. She completed a medical coding certification and secured a stable job at a hospital, one that allowed her to provide for her children without relying on anyone. Her kids were resilient, adjusting to their new reality with a kind of grace only children seem capable of. And when they saw me, they no longer looked at me as a distant aunt. They saw me as someone safe, someone who had never stopped loving them despite everything that had happened. My parents, too, were forced to reckon with the lives they had built on control and appearances. Their financial troubles deepened. Without my support, the safety net they had always assumed would be there. They had to downsize again, selling the house they'd once envisioned as their retirement home. They started attending therapy, slowly peeling back the layers of denial and resentment that had poisoned our family for so long. And while the damage they'd done could never be fully undone, they were finally beginning to understand it. For my part, I built something new from the rubble they'd left behind. The beach house, once the site of humiliation, betrayal, and rage, became a symbol of reclamation. I started hosting gatherings there, quiet weekends with close friends, marine biology retreats for my students, small dinner parties filled with laughter and real connection. Melissa and I became genuine friends. She introduced me to people who valued authenticity over obligation, people who understood that family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. And as for me, I started living, truly living, in a way I never had before. I poured myself into my work, expanding my conservation projects and mentoring younger scientists. I traveled, something I'd always put off because of family obligations. I went to conferences in places I'd only ever dreamed of visiting, Oslo, Kyoto, Cape Town, and spoke about resilience in both ecosystems and human lives. It was in those moments, standing on stages halfway across the world, that I realized something profound. This story, my story, wasn't one of destruction. It was one of rebirth. 6 months after my father's surgery, I received a letter from the district attorney's office. Kevin's embezzlement trial had concluded. He'd been sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. He was also ordered to pay over $200,000 in restitution, a debt that would haunt him long after his release. I read the letter twice before tucking it into a drawer I rarely opened. There was no satisfaction in it, no gloating. Just a quiet acknowledgement that choices have consequences, his, mine, everyone's. And those consequences rippled far beyond the walls of a courtroom. The lake house my parents once threatened to disinherit me from, sold to cover their debts. The perfect family image they'd spent decades curating crumbled under the weight of their own lies. Even their friendships, built on appearances and social climbing, began to erode as their reality caught up to them. For a long time, I thought revenge would feel like this, watching those who wronged me fall apart. But the truth is, real revenge doesn't taste like ashes and ruin. It tastes like freedom. It tastes like choosing yourself even when it costs you everything familiar. A year after the first confrontation, Thanksgiving rolled around again. But this time there was no shouting, no manipulation, no guilt-laced invitations. Instead, my beach house was full of friends, colleagues, and even Jennifer and her kids. The air was warm with laughter, the smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles drifting through the rooms. At one point, I found myself standing on the deck with a glass of wine, watching the waves roll in. Jennifer came to stand beside me, her eyes soft. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly, standing up, drawing the line. I thought about it, about the chaos, the heartbreak, the months of silence from people who once claimed to love me. And then I shook my head. "Not once," I said. Because if I hadn't, I'd still be living a life built on guilt and fear. I'd still be letting people take from me and call it love. She nodded. "I'm proud of you." I smiled. "I'm proud of us." We stood there in silence, two sisters who had walked through fire and somehow found each other on the other side. Not as who we once were, but as who we'd become. Sometimes, late at night, I think about my grandmother. I remember the weight of that pearl necklace in my hand as she whispered, "Stay curious, stay strong." For a long time, I thought those words were about my career, about science, about discovery. But I see now that they were about so much more. Staying curious means questioning the stories people tell you, even the ones written in blood and family ties. Staying strong means walking away from those who would rather see you small than see you soar. I lost a family I once believed would always be there. But in their place, I found something far more powerful, a community that loves me for who I am, a sister who truly sees me, and a self that no longer bends to fit other people's expectations. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that my worth was never determined by how others treated me, but by how I chose to respond. When Kevin screamed at me to leave my own home, I thought it was an ending. It wasn't. It was a beginning. The beginning of a life where I stand tall, where I define my own peace, where I build something beautiful from the ruins they tried to create. And in that life, my life, I am finally, truly free. Thank you for staying with me through this story, one that began with betrayal, but ended with strength, clarity, and peace. If this story resonated with you, I hope you remember this. Boundaries are not cruelty. Saying no is not selfishness. And choosing yourself is not betrayal. It's the first step toward becoming who you were always meant to be. Until next time, I wish you and your family health, love, and the courage to protect your own worth. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told.